I've always said that, since the pandemic, we as event practitioners and professionals have really proven to the world that we are agile and adaptable. I'm never really worried about us. We'll figure it out. We're very good at that adaptability, but I think it really behooves anybody in this industry to be adaptive in really creative ways.
Welcome to Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, brought to you by Byrne Production Services. Here, we explore the different ways business events can bring value to your organization, the latest technological advances in the event space, as well as providing you with actionable strategies to make a business event a success. Let's create an exceptional event experience.
Welcome to Production Value Matters, the business events podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Byrne, CSEP, and today I'm going to be tackling a topic that might not be front of mind for every planner out there, but especially with recent changes, I think it should be. Today we're going to be talking about tariffs, those pesky taxes on imported goods that have rippled through supply chains, pricing, and attendees at events in recent months. Whether or not, to be honest, this isn't going to be about whether those, who you voted for or who you didn't vote for, or which side of that current tariff trade war argument that you are on right now. I really want to concentrate on what the reality of all of this means for people who build, produce, and make a living in events. And so I'm going to dive into some of the important factors we need to talk about. So if you've ever wondered why your AV rental costs are going to go up, why certain exhibit booths seem to be shrinking, or why you're going to see attendance from certain countries dipping, tariffs could be playing a major role in this. So what exactly do tariffs mean for the meetings, incentive, conventions, and events market? How are event organizers going to adapt? And what does the future look like? Stick with me as we break this all down throughout the episode. And as usual, if you'd like to get access to earlier episodes, more deep dive content on all the things we talk about on the podcast, please subscribe on any platform that you're listening today, or go over to productionvaluematters.com where you can subscribe and get access to more content. So first of all, let's start with the basics. So a tariff is essentially a tax that governments impose on imported goods. The goal usually is to protect domestic industries or to potentially retaliate in trade disputes. But ripple effects go far beyond that. When tariffs are introduced, it means higher cost for imported materials and products, which eventually trickles down to businesses and especially end users and consumers. For the meetings and events market, tariffs impact everything from exhibit booth construction, AV equipment rentals, catering, and even travel costs. So in short, if you're in this market and work in any of those related industries, you're already going to be dealing with the fallout from these tariffs, even if you didn't quite realize it yet. So let's break down some of the key ways tariffs are making events a little bit more expensive. So exhibit booths and event infrastructure. Tariffs usually apply on imported steel, aluminum, electronics, for example, food products, wine, beverage, and spirits. And they've driven up the costs of things like staging, trusses, LED screens, and booth structures. Many of these materials are sourced from throughout North America, China, and Europe. And when tariffs are imposed, the extra costs are passed down to event organizers and therefore their attendees. One exhibit vendor recently told me that their clients are seeing price hikes as booth materials and supplies struggle with tariff-driven costs. And this is only within the first 2 weeks since the tariffs were imposed. So look, if you need a projector, a microphone, or an LED wall, many AV companies import their equipment and from manufacturers outside of North America and or through the United States and through other countries. And so with tariffs in place, rental prices are going to start to creep up. That means planners are either need bigger budgets or they're going to have to cut back on certain production elements. One thing we're seeing is in catering, food, and beverage. When the U.S. imposes 25% tariffs on sources of wine, raw materials like fruits and vegetables, caterers and venues are going to see those costs skyrocket. Suddenly, that nice Bordeaux wine at that networking reception becomes a major budget item. Some planners will need to shift to domestic wine or alternative food suppliers to keep costs in check. And then finally, travel and attendance costs. Tariffs often lead to trade tensions, as we have seen between North American countries and the USMCA signatories, as well. That will in turn affect potentially visa policies, airfare prices, and overall travel budgets. During the last sort of U.S.-China trade war, we definitely saw Chinese companies scale back travel spending, sending fewer attendees to conferences and trade shows. So tariffs aren't just about higher prices, though. They also create supply chain disruptions. When countries retaliate against each other with tariffs, it shakes up global trade patterns, making it harder for event professionals to sort materials reliably. Many companies are now diversifying suppliers and instead of relying on traditional cross-border partners. For example, staging materials, they're turning to local and accessible vendors. Certainly, full disclosure, I am Canadian. And so within Canada, a lot of business vendors are now looking for more local solutions rather than bringing something from the outside. While this does reduce tariff exposure, it can also lead to longer lead times and higher costs in the short term. So, this is the same argument that we talk about, sort of changing where manufacturing happens within, the global trade system. That, you could find a local partner, but are they ramped up enough to meet your need and your specific stack to be able to meet your demand? And given time, perhaps they will, but certainly in the short term, that's going to lead to some higher costs as they try to ramp up that infrastructure. Tariff-free alternatives. There are some event planners that are actively seeking, as I said, local vendors to avoid those import taxes. For example, a company that used to rent, highly specialized furniture for VIP lounges at a convention might now have to source from a local supplier or manufacturer instead. However, the product base might not be what they have typically expected. And then stockpiling of inventory. Some businesses have been, and we've seen this a lot in the AV world, because a lot of those new equipment purchases or CapEx or capital expenditures would be subject to tariffs. A lot of AV companies went out and pre-purchased some critical items before those tariffs could take effect. And that was to avoid sudden cost spikes for them. The consequence is for event organizers and planners is that amortization schedule. So they were planning on buying that throughout the year. Now they had to sink a lot of money in it at the beginning of the year. So a lot of AV suppliers are going to be needing to leverage a higher price to be able to offset that cash flow burden. So if you've noticed that exhibitor AV companies are stockpiling certain materials, and even exhibit builders, that's a lot of raw material, whether or not that's, wood, aluminum, steel, and other materials, raw materials, they stockpile those materials in advance as well. And so event planners need to start placing orders early to be able to solidify that supply chain before the real economic impact of those tariffs comes into play. So look, the industry is adapting in creative ways. I've always said that, since the pandemic, we as event practitioners and professionals have really proven to the world that we are agile and adaptable. I'm never really worried about us. We'll figure it out. We're very good at that adaptability. But I think it really behooves anybody in this industry to be adaptive in really creative ways. So here are a few things that we see that we're going to see as a result of that. So I think we're going to get regional and local events rising instead of larger international conventions. Companies are going to start hosting more regional events to cut down on that tariff exposure and travel and shipping cost. Are we going to see the rise of hybrid and virtual again? If attendees from tariff affected countries can't travel due to high costs, virtual components can help to bridge that gap. The pandemic again accelerated this shift, but tariffs may reinforce the need for those hybrid solutions. So I think we need to see some advocacy and industry lobbying. Trade show organizations and event associations like PCMA, ILEA, the Event Industry Council, need to push back on governments and consider broad impacts to the industry. Meetings with Business Canada is a perfect example, and they should be hopefully we're going to see them campaigning more actively and lobbying to minimize those barriers that are being thrown up. And then, certainly some creative cost management. Planners are looking at ways to keep budgets in check, whether by negotiating better deals, finding alternative suppliers, or optimizing logistics to reduce costs. So where does this leave us? While tariffs create challenges, they also push us in the industry to be more innovative and strategic. I think we need to be more strategic in sourcing to avoid, any sort of tariff strategies. So yes, I do think that this is a little bit more local and potentially some alternative suppliers, but it can also be about using those same partners, but in a more strategic way. There needs to be a greater emphasis on localized and regional events. Now, look, I will say that the larger events will still happen. I think that they are still going to be like those flagship positions that they should always be. But, is there, let's pick on Dreamforce for a second. Like, does Dreamforce necessarily have to be this big international thing? Is the strategy to create Dreamforce America, Dreamforce Mexico, Dreamforce Europe, whatever it might be? As I said, increased advocacy for industry exemptions. I think that is, a call to action to our industry associations to go and advocate out or into the governments on all levels to see if we can find exemptions and find ways to sort of stimulate the growth of that. And a stronger push towards hybrid event models. I know everybody sort of wanted to get back to live over the last couple of years, but we know this industry knows how to turn that into compelling hybrid experiences. So let's leverage all the things that we learned during the pandemic and be able to leverage it to this crisis as well. For event organizers, staying informed about tariffs and supply chain disruptions is becoming just such a critical thing. And knowing the latest, as important as the latest event tech trends. So if you're in the market and in the industry, now is the time to build a lot of flexibility, budget wisely, and stay engaged with advocacy efforts that support trade policies that support our industry. So that wraps up today's episode on tariffs. It may not be the flashiest topic in the event industry, but as we've seen, they have real measurable effects on pricing, logistics, and attendance. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with all your industry colleagues. Personally experienced a tariff-related challenge in your events recently? I'd really love to hear from you. Reach out to us on LinkedIn, Byrne Production Services, or visit the website at productionvaluematters.com. We'd really love to hear from you and hear your input. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep planning, keep innovating, and keep on making events happen.
Production Value Matters, the business event podcast, is brought to you by Byrne Production Services. To find out more about Byrne Production Services and how putting on events can drive value for your business, visit byrneproductionservices.com. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Production Value Matters, thank you so much for listening.